Alright, welcome to the Mars Hill House of Intellectual Discourse. I'm Joshua Johnson. We're continuing our study of Rethinking Reality. Tonight we're going to be diving pretty much right into some of the arguments presented in the dialogues. But before we get started, I just want to review a couple things. One of the first things I want to go over is to kind of review the primary study goals that we have here, which is our primary focus is George Berkeley. We're going through the dialogue, but our ultimate goal is going to understand Jonathan Edwards. And the reason I do this is because George Berkeley is easier to read. His language is more common for the common man, for people in his congregation, whereas Jonathan Edwards is sometimes overly complex. Most of his philosophy is done at a very academic level. He was writing to professors, he was writing to other ministers at the time. And another reason that we want to make Edwards the ultimate goal is because Edwards, from my reading of him, solves a lot of the problems that Berkeley never really thought of fixing. He kind of anticipated a lot of the objections that would come down the line against Berkeley. Likewise, Jonathan Edwards has ideas that are relevant, even more relevant than Berkeley, to issues in philosophy right now, in particular the philosophy of mind, which is an area of interest. I also want to cover how I'm going to be doing question answering. And we're going to be doing this at the end of this study, which is going to be different from the last segment. And the way we're going to be doing it is I'm going to let you guys ask me some questions after we're done with the reading, after we're done going over the arguments. And I want to make clear right away is it's not just like a free-for-all, just, okay, what color your underwear, whatever you want to talk about. If you bring up an objection from the book, all right, and it's something that's going to be addressed later, I'm just going to say, wait, Berkeley's going to address this later on in the book. We'll get to that in a later study. A second way I'm going to answer a question is if I see the problem is fixed in Jonathan Edwards. It's going to either be similar that I'm going to say, wait, we're going to cover a little bit of something from Edwards, or I'm going to say that, okay, here's how Edwards fixes it right now, and I'm going to address it right now. Just depends on the nature of the question. Another thing I'm going to do too is, like, if we have a problem that is not addressed in either Berkeley or Edwards, but we could theorize how Edwards or Berkeley would answer on the basis of their system, I will address it that way. I'll say, well, this is probably how Berkeley would have answered that objection, even if it's one that, like I said, did not come up in his time. Now, there's other problems too. Now, there's problems that need to be considered. Now, if there's a problem that I've thought of that is not new and something that is, I don't even think theoretically answerable at this time, and I don't even really know the answer, I'm just going to tell you that I need to chew on the issue. You presented a valid objection, I'm going to think about it. I don't like to have to do that, but I will do that. And another thing is too, some people say that there are no stupid questions, only ones that aren't asked. I disagree. I do believe that they're stupid questions. And if you ask a question that we just covered in the book, plain as day, I'm going to tell you to reread it. I'm going to say, no, we just covered this. I might tell you a little bit, but I do believe they're stupid questions. Likewise, if it's completely off topic, save it for after the study. You don't need to know what color my boxers. You don't need to know any of that until later. Now, another thing I want to review too from the last study is some of the definitions we covered. Now, we covered it in the video a little bit, but just to briefly go over it. Matter is what Berkeley is going against, and matter is not defined as atoms. Matter is not a perceptual object, it's mind independent. It's self-sustaining, it's underlying substance behind things that are perceived. That is directly what he's going against. Likewise, the definition of realism is tying right into matter, is mind-independent objects. Objects exist independent of any mind, or directly present themselves to the mind. Now, I covered this more extensively in the last study, and it is on video, so that's just a brief overview. Likewise, we discussed from the first section of the first dialogue that we read that common sense directly correlates to sense experience in Berkeley. So for Berkeley, what is common sense is sense experience. If you were to ask a gardener how he knows that there's a tree beside him, his common sense answer is, well, looking at it. So sense experience and common sense, they coincide in him. Similarly, skepticism is also defined by Berkeley at the very onset. Skepticism is a suspense. It is not an affirmative or a negative answer to an issue. So it's not, you don't say that I believe that there's a sun or there is no sun. You say, I'm not sure if there's a sun or not, or there is no, or maybe not, I don't know. It's a suspense between affirmative and negative positions. Likewise, what is Berkeley's goal in this? And this is similar to Edwards' system as well, so that's why it's relevant. Edwards wrote this work, and he wrote all of his philosophy for the intention of demonstrating the existence of a deity, of God, the veracity of the soul, that it exists, that we have a soul, and likewise he did it as a defense of science. Now some people would say, and I brought this up last time, that he was undermining science as we know it today. But he truly believed that he was upholding science. He was making science not just relevant, but he was making science free of potential skepticism. He wanted to be strictly about observation. Now, of course, his opponents, he thought about this, were atheism and skepticism. He thought this is what the belief in matter was going to lead to. And that's why he felt that in order to establish deity, the soul, and defend science against atheism and skepticism, he had to destroy matter. He had to refute it, and he had to show that it was impossible. So this is the essence of what we're studying. This is what we covered last week. And without further ado, I think we should jump right into the dialogue. All right, well, we just finished reading the section from the dialogues that we'll have posted on the site. And going through this, we see that the debate is going to be over the relationship between the mind and what's going to be a tentative definition for now, and the alleged object. Now, I put some pictures up here, and it may not be able to be seen clearly in the video, but in this circle here I have heat with a question mark. And this section of the diagram is the mind. And over here, clearly fire. Heat is also with a question mark. Now, the big question is where is the sensation located? That is, where is it at? It's not merely a question of, sometimes when we think about these kind of questions about sensation, we're thinking so much about internalization that you can't hardly think about sensation as being like spatially located somewhere. You almost think of it as the use of something. When I sense something, we're always referring to it as the use of my hands, the use of my eyes. We use it in a very instrumental type of way. However, the question is where is this feeling at, this experience? And this is why I want to hurry up and kind of go over a couple things real quick. And that is properly defining mind. I didn't cover it in the last lecture too much. And that's why I want to cover it now, is that the mind, as Berkeley understands it, is consciousness. It is the faculty of awareness, as Ayn Rand would say. And likewise, you see that Jonathan Edwards will have this exact same definition. In fact, he defines it extremely clearly in his essay called The Mind. He actually says the mind is consciousness. And this is not an uncommon view. Similarly, if you read Jae-Won Kim, who's a professor of philosophy at Brown and is a extremely popular leader in the philosophy of mind, he actually would argue that when you discuss the issue of qualia, which is sensible qualities, it's also defined as primary consciousness, he says that is essentially the mind. He's saying that you can't separate sensation from consciousness. They are mutually together. And similarly, there's also a biologist, Dr. Edelman, who argued a primary versus secondary conscious distinction. This is something else that we need to clarify. When we're discussing sensations, we're discussing something that's immediately perceived, something that's directly coming into our mind. This would be called a primary consciousness. It's like the most fundamental aspect of our experience. Whereas secondary consciousness would be like making a logical deduction, thinking about a baseball game, things of that sort. Secondary consciousness is higher in its cognitive function. It's much higher up in the hierarchy. Whereas sensation is primitive, it's basic, it's coming in, it's what's out there. A baby has primary consciousness. Whereas I would say as the baby develops, secondary consciousness, which is at first a small part of the usage of the mind, begins to increase with learning, begins to use deduction more, to make inferences. Secondary consciousness grows. But primary consciousness is immediately, when experience begins, that is primary consciousness. And so what we're discussing is that basic aspect of consciousness. Now Berkeley would argue that secondary consciousness is dependent on primary consciousness, and they're very closely related. So his point here in discussing primary consciousness is going to, if he can conclude that primary consciousness is, that everything exists in primary consciousness, he will therefore prove that the whole of consciousness, including both, is therefore where everything's contained in. So he will basically, that all he needs to argue is about the issue about sensation. And that's his point. So I want to get into the arguments that Berkeley is making here and see if you guys can maybe answer some questions for me about what you think that the arguments are making. Now, I have identified 3 arguments from the text. Now, some of them are reactionary to one another. Now, the first one I want to ask about is what is the relationship between heat and pain that Berkeley's making?
Well, he's saying, is the pain in the fire, or is the pain in your hand, or your body, or your
Oh,
mind?
exactly. And would you say that he's trying to kind of relate heat and pain as sort of like kind of lump them together?
That's what I gather from him. He's trying to
Yes.
say they're both the same thing.
Yes, and now he's saying that with extreme heat, though. So, and you'll see that in the text, he actually argues that can you distinguish between, is there two sensations when you put your hand in a fire? Do you feel two separate things, or do you feel just one thing?
Well, I don't know what he says. I know what I think.
What do you think?
I think it's two different things. You feel pain, and what you feel heat. Well, I guess maybe it's the same thing.
Yeah, because when you put your hand in the fire and that's searing your flesh, you say, ah, it's warm. Oh, it hurts too. Or you say, you know.
Well, no, let's say you put over something that gradually gets hotter and hotter.
Okay,
and
that's
hotter.
true. No, that's a good point. And I think that's where Hylas comes up with his objection too. Because Hylas will talk about the lesser degrees. He says, well, those could exist in the object. So in this first argument, what is the basis of his argument? Okay, well, what's his whole point in lumping pain and heat together? What is he trying to establish? So where
they're both being sensed in the mind.
in the mind.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but it's another way of looking at it is pain, the sensation of pain, the feeling of pain is in a subject only. Okay? This is the crucial point he's trying to show. That in order to have pain, you have to be experiencing pain, so therefore you have to be something that can have experiences. Okay? Can fire have a sensible experience? Is it conscious? Okay? Like, for instance, now this is where, in this argument, I want to draw a quick syllogism. I'm not going to write it on the board, I'm just going to quickly explain it. His first premise would be, is pain is in a subject only. Okay? Only a conscious entity can have pain. Okay? Premise 2, heat is pleasurable or painful. Now later Hylas is going to bring up objection, and Hylas is going to bring up objection, and Philonous is just going to say, okay, well, let's move on. If I can't prove to you that lesser degrees of heat are pleasurable, then I'll just go to the next argument. But for the time being, in this first argument, he's going to try to argue that heat is either pleasurable or painful. So his conclusion is heat is in the mind. Why? Because pain, in the first premise, or pleasure, if you will, and any of those type of things, are things that can only happen in a conscious subject. So, if heat is pain or pleasure, okay, can only exist in the mind, then his conclusion is affirmed. I mean, it's quite clear. So if it can only be in a subject, and fire is not a conscious mind, it must be in me, not in the fire. That's his first argument. Now there's actually a quicker way of, and I'm going to use this basic outline a lot. It's called the Qualia Argument, and I see it a lot in the philosophy of mind. And one of the ways you can basically argue for whether a sensation exists in consciousness that they use, I think if Berkeley had known it, I think he probably would have just used it, because it simplifies the whole thing. Like, for instance, if you were a person who never experienced pain, and you saw people touching fire and going, ouch, do you understand pain? Do you know what pain is?
No.
Okay, now, when you touch that fire yourself,
Yeah.
and you experience pain for the first time, now do you know what pain is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, the question is it sufficient to observe pain in others, or to even observe objects that are said to cause pain, in order to gain that knowledge of pain, that comprehensive knowledge? Now, it's the same. Now, I'll bring up this general structure, especially when we get to visual perception, because I think in that area specifically, it's one of the best ways to argue it. But the point is that where does pain lie? Can I study synapses in the brain and say, that's pain? Like, if I never had pain before and I was in a room, never had experienced pain in my life, and watched testimonies of people in pain, touching objects that cause pain, examining their brain and looking at synapses firing when they claim to be experiencing pain, have I experienced pain? Did I have pain? No. So where is the sensation of pain for me? Well, I don't have it yet. That's the point. That's the point. He's saying that is heat, the feeling of heat, if it's a sensation, okay, which Hylas will contend later on. If it's a sensation, it can't exist in the object. It can't. Because I can examine fire all I want and not have pain. That would be what the Qualia argument implies.
Okay.
I can study someone touching fire and not have pain. So where's the pain? Where's pain? It's in consciousness, is what he's going to argue. And this is, that's, like I said, it's a philosophy of mind argument, but it's very relevant to what Berkeley's trying to draw here. He's bringing up the question, where is the sensation, which is the experience, where is it located? Because that's what pain is. Pain is an experience. It's a sucky experience. He's basically asking, where is it at? Is pain in the fire? Or is it in the mind? Now that's sort of where he's going with this. But now he brings up a second argument. And can anybody tell me what the second thing he does is? The second argument he goes into after...
Cold.
Well...
What?
Now what's he say to...
Well, he says you can't experience hot and cold at the same time, though.
Okay, now
Yeah.
that's the second argument. Now, he starts out by asking Hylas a question. He asks him, can what? Can a principle that leads man to absurdity? Something along those lines?
Can any doctrine be true that necessarily leads a man to an absurdity?
Now, what's he implying? Now, what's absurd about it? First of all, well, what's he saying is going to be absurd?
That two things are the same thing. That two different things are.
Now, why is that absurd?
Well,
Anybody
he's
take logic?
going in absolutes. If it's hot, it's hot. If it's cold, it's cold.
Okay, but to be more specific, there's a principle in logic. I think I have enough room here to write it. A is not non-A. Let's see if we can circle that. A is not non-A. So A cannot be its opposite at the same time. So it's the law of non-contradiction. One of the cardinal of the three laws of logic. Something is what it is. It can't be two things that are opposite at the same time. So A cannot be non-A.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so when he's discussing now, the reason this is relevant to his argument. Now, can anybody tell me why this would be relevant, what he's trying to argue? In regards to Hylas. Why would this be a problem for Hylas?
Well, I guess the mind can't think of things as it's either hot or it's cold.
Yeah.
You're right. Now, and that's the point. Because the
If he
point,
says it's in the object, and if it's in the
That's
object,
it.
it can't be two different
exactly.
things.
If it is in the object.
Yeah.
Okay, if we're identifying the sensation as mind independent.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we're identifying heat and even pain, therefore, or just heat, like even if, because even the previous argument, Hylas conceded to Hylas and said, okay, whatever, I can't convince you that warmth is a pleasure. Well, let's move on. If it's a contradiction, we can't hold it. And Hylas agrees. Okay, so if you're saying that the object, okay, heat is in the object. Okay, the object is hot. Remember, we're dealing with sensations, not temperature. Temperature is a measurement that's based on sensations, observation, things like that. We observe water freezing. Okay, so therefore we designate that 0 degrees Celsius. Okay, which makes sense. You know, the Fahrenheit system maybe makes a little less sense, but the fact of the matter is that we designate temperatures based on sensations, not the other way around. So when you go outside, before you even look at a temperature, how do you react? Oh, it's a nice day out. Or, man, it's cold. I'm going to freaking go back and get a jacket. You know, those type of reactions are based on sense experience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's how we decide temperature. We decide temperature based on our experience. So we got to remember these primaries before we get into it. So when he talks about water being in an intermediate state, he's talking about water that maybe we designate at what we would call lukewarm under normal circumstances. We would call it like 70 degrees or 65 or something in that range. Okay, so he's saying then, if you take a hand that's hot and a hand that's cold and you put it in that water, you're having contradictory sensations. Now, why is this a problem? Because if it's in the object, if the object is hot, okay, or is cold, remember, sensation, not temperature. If it is the sensation, if the sensation is in that object, all right, it can't violate the law of logic, okay? Because that's where he established right away with Hylas, and Hylas agreed. If it leads to absurdity, if it leads to violation of the law, then we must reject it. And Hylas says, well, okay, the water is both hot and cold, according to my hands. Now, yes, one hand was previously hot, one hand is previously cold, but that's not the point. The point is
Your mind is telling you to.
yes, the mind is the one who's dictating what the water feels like. The water's not dictating what it is to the mind. You put your hands in the water, you can have contradictory sensations because the mind is what's determining factor. not the water itself. If the water was the sensation, it wouldn't matter what your hands were doing. It would have told you what it was. It would have presented itself to you, which is part of realism, presentational realism. It presents to the mind what it is, its actual attributes, what it is independent of you perceiving it. Whereas this is sort of what the argument philonous is kind of critiquing. Now, there's a third argument he gets into. It's the one where we get a rather scary speaking point on the part of the man. What argument is that? Now, this is kind of a reaction.
All I remember saying was, what?
He just,
About the needle.
yeah, needle.
It sounded like a lyric
one, yeah.
It sounded like a lyric from a metal band.
Yeah. Crazy, yeah.
I don't know where that was.
Well, hylas starts off with, can it be more absurd to say that there is no heat in the fire?
Yes, that's how it begins. But then, what's the example then? It should be on every...
Difference between pricking yourself with a pin
And staring yourself in the fire.
Yeah,
Coals,
burning your finger.
Yeah,
Pricking your...
pricks your finger, does it not run to divide the fibers of your flesh?
Exactly. Now, so what's his point? Okay, now what's his... No pun intended, okay? So, what is his point with discussing the pin? Now, why is he even bringing that up?
Because the pin, he's saying, is the pin pain, or is there pain
Good
in
point.
the pin?
He says, now this is a reaction to Hylas' objection. He goes, isn't it absurd to say heat is not in the fire? He goes, well, you don't say that pain is in the pin when it pricks your finger and divides your flesh. And when fire also causes damage to your flesh, you should likewise do the same exact thing. Instead of saying, like you wouldn't say that pain is in the pin, you shouldn't say that heat is in the fire. And remember, he's making that quality between heat and... Hylas did concede that much. He did say that extreme heat is pain, and therefore that much is in the mind. Even if you can't say the general warmth is, at least we can say that extreme heat, because that you can't separate from the pain, must be in the mind. Okay, so at that point, he's still making a legitimate criticism at Hylas, because Hylas did concede that much. So what his criticism is then is, okay, just like you wouldn't say that pain is in the pin when it damages your flesh, okay, and occasions the pain, it's the occasion in which pain arises in your mind. In the same sense, when fire damages your flesh, you shouldn't say that extreme heat or pain is in the fire. Okay? The occasion or the event at which fire damages your flesh is when the event in your mind occurs that you're having a pain. But it just like you would say pain's in the pin, you can't say pain is in the fire or extreme heat. That's the point. No pun intended. Actually, I think the pun was intended. Eric would say point because this is going to get anonymous. Okay. So those are the three very important arguments to cover. So now I want to go right into you guys. Throw it at you. I want you guys to ask me some questions. Okay, ask me some questions related to the text, related to this topic.
Before you were saying you can't tell where, or not you can't tell, but like how can you tell where sensation occurs, right? And I'd say you probably, you say it in your mind, but I would say in your body, you interpret it. If we turn the lights out and I light a match and burn you somewhere, you're going to know where it is.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Now, the relationship between the mind and the body, I would say, now I don't think Berkeley denies that there's a relationship, an intricate relationship. But let's say, even if you have the lights off and you have that tactile sensation, he's not saying that tactile sensation, which is referring to touching, like especially in this discussion here about heat, which is the main idea, is tactile sensation. I don't think he's trying to say that, okay, well, tactile sensation is limited to just like in this strange, misty mind area. But no, I think he does believe that it's related to, okay, what I perceive my body to be doing. Like, for instance, when I reach out my hand, I'm observing my hand doing something. Before then, I feel the following sensation in my mind of, let's say, pain once I touch the fire. Okay? So you actually have a correlation between two different types of perception. All right? You're saying, okay, I have an observed event. I have an observed knowledge of my body, even if it's memory. If the lights are out, I have an idea where my foot's at. When the lights go out, I don't forget where my foot's at. I have a general idea, and I can still feel it. I still know where my foot's at. And that's still sensation. I still have that feeling. It's still a perceptual understanding. It's not like intuited, like I have some sort of diagram that just pops up and that's okay, well, where's my mind at? Where's my body at? Where's my eyes? No. You have a feeling. You have an idea where they're at.
What's with phantom limb, too?
Well, phantom limb syndrome is also a good point. People have pains in limbs that no longer have. Now, I think that's an odd question for any philosophical position. But I think the general idea is if pain was in the object, then why would they be having it? Now, when someone, like, for instance, here's a good example of pain. Okay, you can go to the doctor and say you have a toothache. You can look at your teeth are fine. You don't have a toothache. No, I have a toothache. My tooth hurts. All right? The doctor can't tell you you're not having pain. Okay? You could very well be having pain, even if he can't see something in your body. I mean, how many times do you go to the doctor and, I mean, you're sick, and they're like, well, you have a virus. You know? It's like the generic catch-all for everything. And the point is because they can't always empirically verify by looking and perceiving your body what's causing what you're describing. Okay, you're relaying this experience. They can't look at it and say, okay, well, here's what it is. Okay, oftentimes you can find out what occasions it. That's why the point of the pin is so important. The pin damages the flesh that's the occasion in which you have pain arising in the mind. But it's not always like that. Sometimes you can't look at the body and have a physical account of the pain that you're having. A doctor might just throw up his hands and make up a disease. They do that all the time. It's like, we have a disease and we can't really tell you. There's like a million symptoms for it. You know, it happens that way. And it's the only way you can explain this. If pain must correlate to something that we can observe in the body. All right? Well, you have a lot of people out there that are just downright deceitful. But now, oftentimes, I think, even if we were to be honest with ourselves, we can say, in times in our life, I had a pain, but I couldn't find where it was. Or I have a general idea where it was, but a doctor could look at my shoulder and say, your shoulder's fine. It happens. And it's not because we can always look at the body and say, well, this is what did. Now, this is the problem with behaviorism, too, in philosophy. And I'll just bring this up real quickly. It's the same concept. The idea that we can prove that you're conscious just by observing your behavior. Okay, I can see you waving your arms and talking and saying that you're in pain, retching on the ground, but you could be lying. I can't know just from looking at you what your experience is, if you're always necessarily lying or telling the truth. Sometimes it's honest. Okay, sometimes I can look, and usually we have to, being humans, living together, there has to be some degree of trust where if my wife is screaming saying, I'm going to have a baby, I believe it. And pretty soon now, and if the head pops out, I'm going to be pretty darn sure. All right? The point is that if you hear someone saying something, you got to make a decision about whether to accept or reject it. But you don't know with definite certainty, absolute concrete certainty, every time someone does something, what exactly they're experiencing in their consciousness. It's not necessary proof. There's no necessary connection. It's a correlation. And that's, I think, very important with what Berkeley's trying to point out, is that when the pin divides the flesh, you don't say that the pin is pain. You say that the pin damaging the flesh, dividing the fibers of your flesh, is the basis or is the event at the same time that pain occurs. Similarly, if I were to sear your flesh, that is the occasion at which you have the experience of pain. But because pain is still an experience, it still exists in a subject. Any more questions? So, Michael?
So basically we come to the consensus that heat and pain are the same thing?
Well, I don't know if, I think the point with Berkeley writing, when he wrote the dialogues, to have Hylas kind of press that objection and saying that, these lesser degrees may not be able to be considered pleasurable. Now, I think you get the tone from Hylas if he thinks this is being ridiculous. He's like, you're being ridiculous if you're not going to say that, gentle warmth isn't enjoyable in some sense. But Hylas can press a point, and that's why Hylas eventually concedes and moves on to the next argument, because you could say that, heat in general, like warmth coming from a register in your home, you're indifferent to it. You don't consider it pleasure, and I think that you could probably argue it either way. I think if you're clever enough, you could simply say that because it is the absence of discomfort, it must therefore be comfort, and therefore a type of pleasure, even if you're not standing there going, ooh, it's a subtle pleasure. It's a comfort.
Heat can also be pleasurable, and if you're cold.
Yes, and if you're alleviating an uneasiness that you've previously had. But typically, especially in the Western world, if you go back to days of old, all right, and they were to look at how we live now, they would say we have a comfort in having heat, or we have a comfort in having air conditioning in the summer. Okay, we have a luxury or a pleasure. All right, and now they say this in a general way to refer to the state of that we're living in, but the concept is there. The idea that because we're able to alleviate what would normally be uneasiness, we have therefore walked into a pleasure, even if we don't stand around all day just oohing and ahhing over it. You know, you're in a state of pleasure because you've been able to avoid uneasiness. Now, you could make that argument, but like hylas pressed, and I think finalists conceded because it wasn't worth 10 pages of dialogue, was that, okay, hylas would say that, well, I'm indifferent to it, so therefore I'm not going to say that it is pleasure or pain.
Yeah.
Finalists says, so what? We'll just move on to the next issue, which I think is a stronger argument anyway. But now, the point in bringing up extreme temperatures first, and this is why finalists brings it up first, is because it's so much harder to distinguish between pain and pleasure and the extreme temperature. Extreme cold and extreme heat, it's hard to take the heat away from the pain associated with it. They're very closely interrelated. If you put your hand in fire or boiling water, there is not a deductive process in there in your mind that splits them up at the moment you put your hand in there. It's like heat, ouch. No, it's ouch. It's out. Get my hand out. It's like immediate. It's that, you know, that reflex, because it's hard to separate the two. Now, that's why when you talk about extreme heat and pain, and that's why he said, can you distinguish them sensibly when it happens? No. Now, can you, yes, when you're walking towards the boiling water, and I think Matt brought this up already, can you feel the degrees of heat before you get to the extreme temperature? Oh, absolutely. Okay, maybe at first it's a pleasure and it's like a slight discomfort, maybe it's hard to tell, but when you stick that hand in that, you know, molten lava or boiling water, okay, the distinction starts to end.
I was just thinking that extreme heat, whenever he brings that up, it's only relative to our body temperature. I've talked about that before. So, like, and to call something, you can tell when something's hot, but to say extreme heat is going to, you know, we label it extreme heat, but if our body temperature was 200 degrees, it might not feel that way. Likewise with cold, if our body temperature was 50 degrees, cold would probably be more like 0.
And that's actually a good point.
So, like, we can't say for absolute certainty that something is hot or cold.
Now, see, that's a good point, because you actually bring up, there's an interesting article by Thomas Nagel. It's extremely popular. I have 2 books that actually have it contained in it, 2 compilations. Philosophy of Mind, Classical Contemporary Writings, and I also have Analytic Philosophy, an anthology. Both books list the article because it's so significant. And the book's called What's It Like to Be a Bat? Okay? The reason that argument is significant, and what's it like to be a bat, is because he's bringing up the question is, okay, can we know, now we can study a bat sonar, all right, I'll show you how this relates to your question. I can study a bat sonar, I can see how it uses echolocation, I can study diagrams, I can observe it in nature, I can analyze the organs that cause this, I can look at it empirically, but I don't know what it's like to have echolocation, to use sonar. I don't know what it's like to be a bat, okay? So therefore, I don't know what it's like to have that type of sensation. Okay, the sensation of echolocation. Okay, I can observe it in an animal. Okay, and tentatively maybe come up to, but I can't even comprehend what it'd be like to have echolocation because I don't. Now, the reason I think that's relevant to your objection is because you're saying, okay, well maybe if my body was 250 degrees Fahrenheit, all right, boiling water would be nice. You know, it'd be like a nice spring bath. Yeah. It'd be like go swimming. You know, but I think that the reason the objection is significant is because we can only theorize what that would be like. We don't have that sensation. Similarly, if you were, you know, negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, you know, in your body, you know, you walk out 32 degrees Fahrenheit, you're sweating. You know, you're putting clothes on. Man, you know what I mean? Water's freezing. You know, I'm going to die. You know, it's I think the point is that because we're talking about a hypothetical where, just like with a bat, it's like, well, I don't know what echolocation's like, or even trying to theorize what it'd be like. We just can't. Because it's a conscious experience, it's basically outside of our realm of verification, unless we somehow mutate ourselves and become like bats. Now, similarly, if you're a molten lava man, okay, maybe, you know, and even then, he can only relay his experience. And once again, the same thing with the idea is, just by behavior, I can't necessarily know what you're experiencing. Even if I did come across a molten lava man, and he told me what heat and cold was like to him, I can only take it at his word because I still haven't experienced it. Whereas we are communicating to each other a common human experience. We can nod at each other and say, yes, I have conscious experience. This is how it does, and this is where the validity of his argument comes in. The question is, okay, where is the sensation located at? And even for a molten lava man, okay, he puts his hand in the sun, that's to say extremely hotter than him, okay, warms it up, sticks his other hand on earth and gets it really cold and sticks it in an intermediate substance at his temperature, he's still going to have the same problem. The same problem that Berkeley brought up. Okay? It'll apply at a different level, but it'll still apply. All that would mean is that the way things exist in the mind, perceptually, are different for different types of beings. That's all that would mean. Any other questions? We're good?
Yeah.
Right on time. All right. Well, this concludes the study. Go in peace and have a good day.